Hi, it's Stacey. Thanks so much for joining me, and this week I'm going to show you how to make this really cute sewing machine mat for our sewing machines. But first, let's find out who's going to win the Fat Quarter Shop Sew Sampler Box, the November one. I've got all the entries in here from last week, and I'm just going to pull someone's name out randomly. Okay, and the winner is Jesus is the Only Way to the Father. Congratulations! I remember reading your comment and you told me you can't often enter the giveaways because you're only on YouTube, not on the other social media channels. So thanks so much for entering. Please send me an email and I'll pop it in the post you as soon as I can. But for now, let's get on to making our sewing machine mat. First of all, please make sure you press your fabric and then let's get started. So you can find detailed instructions on exactly what size to cut these pieces on my website, and I'll have the link in the description below. But for my small pocket, I've got 3 2.5 inch by 3 inch squares. I've got a bigger piece which will be the backing and the self binding, and this piece is 8 inches by 3.5 inches, and then I've got a little piece of batting which is 8 inches by 2.5 inches. So then to get started, what we're going to do is just pop these aside and we're going to sew these 3 pieces together. I'm just going to take some pins and I'm going to sew along these 2 seams. So I'm just going to fold that over. Open it back up. And I've just done that because they're in the order that I want to sew them in, so I don't want to accidentally mix that up. So now I'm just going to sew them together. Okay, so I've got my 1/4 inch foot on because I'm just used to using a 1/4 inch foot when I'm sewing things that are kind of quilty or patchworky. I'm using Gutermann thread, which I find a really nice thread just for everyday sewing. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2 because I want it nice and tight so it's nice and strong. And I'm not going to worry about doing a back stitch. So with that, with all those edges lined up, the corners, I made sure I pinned it nicely. I'm just going to sew along that seam. Just going to cut the thread. And then I'm going to sew these 2 pieces together. Just double checking that it's all lined up nicely. I also checked that my sewing machine was stitching nicely before I started. Okay, we'll just give that a quick press. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly set the seams, which I like to do. Just helps flatten the stitches and make them nice and strong, as well as helping it lay nice and flat. Then I'm going to finger press the seams and I'm just going to press to the left. You could press towards the dark. I don't really have dark fabric. It doesn't really matter too much. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we're going to take our backing for our small pocket. I'm going to turn it over. Just move these up a little. Then I'm going to take the little piece of batting and I'm going to put it down in the bottom, lining it up on that edge and lining it up on the 2 sides. So we'll have 1 inch left over at the top. Then I'm going to take the piece that we just ironed and sewed together and then iron, and I'm going to pop that on top, lining up the 2 edges and the bottom. And when I think that's sitting nicely, I am just going to pop a couple of pins in, just to keep it in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold down this excess piece of our backing and I'm going to fold it down to meet the edge we've got here. I'm going to give it a finger press, and when I'm happy that's how I'd like it, I'm going to give it a press. I'm going to fold it over again and press again. Now I'm just going to sew that down, but what I will do is just pop a couple of pins in, just so it's staying in place and exactly how I want to sew it down. Okay, so now we're just going to sew along this edge, attaching our binding, our self-binding that is. So now I'm just going to stitch this down. I want to come quite close to the edge here, but not too close. So just work out the best guide for you on your sewing machine. I have taken off my 1/4 inch foot because it's going to be easier with my standard foot, because I want to come a little bit more across than 1/4 inch. And I am going to stitch at stitch length 2.5. I'm not going to worry about doing a back stitch. Okay, just trimming those threads while I'm here. And now you can see I've just sewn along that edge there. So that's it for now for our small pockets. Let's move on to our larger pockets. So for the pockets, we're going to need 3 3-inch by 5-inch pieces, 1 6-inch by 5 inches, and 1 8-inch by 5 inches. And then for the backing, it needs to be 21 inches by 6 inches, and for the batting, 21 inches by 5 inches. But like I said, don't worry, all the cutting instructions are on my website. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to sew these 3 pieces of fabric together and these 2 pieces of fabric together. So I'm just going to pop a pin in so I know where I want my seam to be. You can either make sure they're matched up all nicely as we pin, or you can correct it as you go. Okay, let's sew those seams. So just like before, I've got my 1/4 inch foot on. I'm stitching at stitch length 2, and I'm not going to worry about a back stitch, so I'm just going to sew all those seams that we pinned. And just before I sew, I will check that all the edges are lined up nicely. Okay, and I'm just going to give my loose threads a trim. Okay, so now what we need to do is we just need to get the small pockets that we sewed and pop that in to sew this seam together, joining up our larger pockets. So now I've got the 2 pieces that I sewed together and we've got this gap here. What we're going to do is take our smaller pocket that we sewed and we're going to pop it here. We're going to line up the edges on the right hand side and along the bottom. And then what we'll do is we will just move that pin in, keeping that in place. So now I've just pinned that on and you can see my edges are all lined up nicely. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew these 2 pieces together. So I'm just going to fold that over on top, line up those edges nicely, lining them on both the sides and at the top, and I will pop in a few pins. So just checking everything's lining up. And now let's sew that seam. So just like usual, 1/4 foot is still on, stitching at stitch length 2. I'm not going to worry about a back stitch there. Coming right off the end, I will trim the threads. And now we've got our nice long pocket. Let's give that a quick press. Okay, so just trying to work around this piece, which is quite solid compared to the rest. I'm just going to set the seams that we sewed and then press them. So again, it doesn't really matter which way you press them. Just on this one here where it's a bit chunky, I'd probably press them away from the left-hand side, away from the bulkiness here. So how it's naturally falling is how we'll press it. So I'll just give that a finger press and a press. Finger press, press. And then this is a bit awkward here. Might take that pin out for now. And then I'm going to press those all coming towards my left. Okay, now we're starting to see it come along. Okay, so now I've got my backing, and which is also going to be my self-binding, and I've got the wrong sides facing me. I'm going to take my batting and I'm going to line it up along the bottom edge and the sides, just like we did for the smaller pocket. And when I'm happy that that's all lined up, remembering we've got our 1-inch spare at the top, I'll take my pocket that we just sewed and I'm going to place it on top, lining it up along the bottom and the sides. And what I will do now is just pop a couple of pins in to keep it in place. So just like last time, we're going to fold down this top edge, lining it up towards the edge of our pockets, giving it a finger press and then pressing once we're happy. And then we'll fold that over again and press. And then I will just pop in a couple of pins to keep it in place while I'm sewing. So now we're just going to stitch down our binding again, and I've got my standard foot on and I've worked out the best place for me to stitch along using a guide on my foot. And I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2.5. I'm not going to worry about a back stitch. And then I'm just going to cut the threads. I'll cut them on the other end too, just so we're staying nice and tidy. Now let's work on our main padding piece, now that we've finished our pockets. So now we're going to make this main part of our sewing machine mat, and I've got my backing here with the wrong side facing me and the right side facing down. My piece is 24 inches by 22 inches, which is the minimum size. And then what we will do is trim it down to size once we've finished quilting it, because it can move around a bit, and I think it's the best way to do it at this stage. Then we take our batting, and my piece is 19 inches by 21, and that's the size it needs to be. Just making sure you've got an even amount of space around the edges. We need at least 1.5 inches so we can fix it up, like I said, after we've quilted. Then I'm going to take my fabric that's going to be on the top with the right sides facing me, and we need to line that up nicely on the batting, because the batting and the top piece of fabric won't be changing once we've sewn it, or rather quilted it. We will just be trimming this outer edge. So make sure you're happy with how that's sitting, and when you are, we'll pop a few pins in place So we'll pop a few pins in to keep it in place. If you're a quilter, you might have some basting pins that you'd like to use. It's not so big, so I'm not going to worry about that today. And then once we've popped some pins in, we're just going to quilt it so the 3 layers stay together nicely. Now you can quilt yours however you'd like. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start in the corners and go all the way across on both corners, and then I'll just do a few extra rows quite spaced apart because that's all it really needs, but you might want to do something fancy. Okay, let's start quilting. So now I'm going to quilt mine, and like I said, I'm going to quilt from corner to corner. That's how I'm going to start off, and I just drew a really light line as my guide. And one thing to remember is because we are going to be using the backing as the binding, when we quilt, we just want to quilt up to the edge about 1/8 of an inch away from it. We don't want to go over and past our top fabric and our batting, because when we turn this over, you will see it. So let's start 1/8 of an inch in from our edge, and I will do a back stitch just so we know it's extra secure. So I'm just going to start there. I did actually draw my line a bit wonky. I'm not too worried. I'm not starting in the actual center. Like I said, it was a rough line. Now I'm going to stitch at stitch length 3, and I've got my standard foot on. I'm not going to worry about a walking foot because it's not really big. I shouldn't have too many problems. So just remembering, when I come down to this edge, I'm not going to sew right up to the edge. I'm going to leave about 1/8 of an inch, and I will just do a back stitch. I'll just cut those threads while I'm here. And can you see that? I've just sewn to there. So when I'm folding over my fabric, it will cover my workings, but I'm not coming over and past onto what will become my binding. Okay, starting at my next corner, just a bit away from the edge, and doing a back stitch before I get started. Okay, so I've finished quilting. What I ended up doing was just getting a pencil mark and, like I said, going from corner to corner and quilting along that. And then once I'd done that, I took a ruler, measured 5 inches across and drew another line. And then once I'd sewn there, I drew another line 5 inches across. I did that on all the sides, and you can see that better on the back here. But you can do it however you like. I just wanted to show you in case you weren't sure what to do. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this backing is measuring 1 inch from the edge of our top fabric here. So what I'll do is I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to find the 1 inch mark on my ruler, line it up on the edge of my top fabric, and then I'm just going to cut this excess off. So you only get one shot at this, so take your time, don't rush. Make sure you're lined up on that 1 inch mark and cut. And then I'll just do that to all 4 sides. Okay, now once we've done that, let's attach our pockets. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention was I did give the whole thing a press before I cut off the backing to the 1 inch mark. So give everything a good press, including your pocket. And then we're going to take our pocket and we're going to take it and we're going to line it up along the bottom and on the sides. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew down all these seams, creating our pocket. We're going to lift this up and over, and we'll sew down here and down here, basically everywhere where there's a seam. Then we'll pop this down and we'll sew the last 2 seams down. So what I'm going to do is I'll flip this over to the side. I'm going to make sure the edges all lined up on the sides and at the bottom and pin them in place. Then I'm going to flip this over. Okay, let's sew all these seams, creating our first lot of pockets. Okay, so I've got my standard foot on. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2 so it's nice and compact, and I'm going to start just below the binding, right in the seam here, which is what we call stitch in the ditch. So I'm going to lower my needle down so I know I'm starting in a really good spot. It's the best way to know that you're getting it exactly where you want it to be. I'll lower my foot and I will do a back stitch because we want it to be extra strong. So I'll come forward about 3 stitches, go back to where I started, and now I'm going to come all the way down to the bottom, but not past the backing, remember. And about 1/8 from the edge I will do a back stitch so it's nice and strong. Coming forward a couple and then trimming my threads. And I'm going to repeat that on the next seam. Coming forward 3 stitches, going back to where I started, and then coming all the way down to the edge. Oh, now can you see how that's folded up there? We do not want that. We want to make sure this backing is down. We don't want to accidentally sew it into our sewing machine pad, or we'll be unpicking that. Back stitch. Okay, now I'm just going to lift this flap over so I can get to the next lot of pockets. And I'm going to do exactly the same for the next 2 pockets. So now you can see it's really coming along. We've got our pockets there. So now what we're going to do is just sew along these 2 seams, creating our smaller pockets. So I'm just going to make sure it's all lined up nicely, and I'll just pin that down. Okay, let's sew those last 2 seams. Okay, so we're just going to do exactly what we did for the larger pockets. So now we're going to finish off our binding, and just like we did before, we're going to fold it up, finger press it, although this piece is a little bit long so it's not really helping. So just fold it up to the edge of the top of our sewing pad and then press, making sure you're happy with how it's sitting. And then we fold it over on top and press again. Be careful that if you're using steam it gets really super hot. Now when I come up to this corner, I'm going to give it an extra good press. And I'm just going to pop some pins in so that I know that I'm sewing it how I want it to sit. And now when we come up to the corner, all we're going to do is take the edge that we've just folded and fold it again, and then we're going to fold this corner up and over to meet the edge here. So it's down, we're taking this edge and we're folding it up to meet the corner there on a right angle. Then I'm going to give that a press. Oh, being careful of my fingers. Then all I'll do is turn it around and carry on. So I'm going to fold this edge up to meet the edge of my top fabric. Pressing, taking extra care where we've just done the corner. Going all the way to the edge, then folding up, again taking extra care of that corner, folding it up and over and making sure you're happy with that. You can see I've got a really nice mitered corner there. It looks great to me. So folding it all up, and then when we're happy, pressing. Coming all the way to that edge again. Sorry, you couldn't quite see it there. So I've come all the way to this edge. Let's just give that another press. Popping in some pins again. Just checking that I'm happy with how my mitered corner is going to be sitting. And I'm going to pin right on that. And now we're coming up to our next corner. So I'm going to take this folded edge again and bring it up and fold it over to meet the edge of the top of the sewing pad. Pressing it, giving it a good press. Turning it around and carrying on until I've done that on all four sides. It will be a little bit bulky down the bottom where we've got our pockets. So now we're just going to attach our binding on like we did the pieces for our pockets. It was a little bit chunky down the bottom here, so I put in a few extra pins to keep it in place. And when I got back round to the place where I'd started, I just had to take the pin out and open it up to do that last corner. So now let's finish it off. So I'm just going to start somewhere in the middle so that when I get to the corners I can really concentrate on them. And we're just doing exactly what we did last time. I've got my standard foot on. I'm going to stitch at stitch length 2.5, and I've worked out the best guide for me. I will do a few stitches and then do a back stitch. Now I've got my pins in the wrong way, so when I'm coming up to this corner I'm just going to pull it out and just pop it in so it can keep it nice and secure as I'm coming up to it. So I'm just pulling my pin out as I come up to it, and I can see that I've captured that really nicely. And then when I think I'm past the edge, so that when I turn it around I'm about the same spot, I'm going to keep my needle down, lift my foot up and spin it around. Once we get to the pockets, it's a little bit chunky because we've got a lot of layers, so just go slowly, or if you've got a walking foot you might choose to use that. So I'm just going to fix up these positions of these pins again. So now we've finished our sewing machine mat. Isn't that cute? So now you can have some fun working out which tools you want to pop in there. I made this one extra long so that the scissors could sort of go in on the side. They're quite tall, so we don't really have that much space to have it hanging. So the idea is that scissors could go down on this pocket, down on the side, and then you can just put whatever you like to have on hand in the different pockets. And of course course, don't forget you could change how many pockets there are. You could make it bigger, smaller. You might not want to have so many little pockets. It's just entirely up to you. And then the idea is that we pop the sewing machine on and the weight of the sewing machine holds it in place. There's even enough room to pop my little pin cushion on there. Isn't that cute? And this size is actually big enough to fit my big sewing machine. I just wouldn't have room for my pins. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you liked my sewing machine mat tutorial. Don't forget you could always make your mat bigger or smaller depending on the size of your sewing machine. You could also change up the pockets. You might want to add more, have less, or make them a specific size for a tool you've got. Just have fun with it. And please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button so you get notifications every time I do a new video. I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching my videos. If you're enjoying them, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment.